My business partner got pregnant by my boyfriend and tried to steal my company. My mother knew the truth and still told me to raise the baby anyway. So I went nuclear. And I took everything back. My name is Genevieve Mercer. I'm 40 years old. And I live in coastal Georgia, where the air tastes like salt. The marsh grass cuts the horizon into gold strips at sunset, and anything made of steel starts dying the second the ocean wind touches it. For 12 years, I built a company called Tidewater Protective Coatings LLC out of a rented shop off Highway 25 near Garden City. Industrial coatings and corrosion control. If that means nothing to you, think about every steel structure within 50 miles of salt water. Bridges. Port cranes. Storage tanks. Water towers. Ship components. Pipeline supports. All of it rusts. All of it needs blasting, priming, coating, inspecting, and maintaining on a schedule, or it falls apart quietly until one day something very expensive fails in a very public way. That was my business. Boring to most people. A gold mine if you knew what you were doing. And I knew what I was doing. I started Tidewater when I was 28 with Shelby Pratt. Shelby and I went all the way back to middle school in Rincon. We played ball together, got into trouble together, worked summer jobs around Thunderbolt when we were 17, and thought smelling like diesel and shrimp bait made us tough. She was the kind of friend who knew what I looked like before I learned how to hide disappointment behind a polite smile. When her first marriage collapsed after 11 months, I was the one who drove with her to Tallahassee to get her dog back because she was too wrecked to go alone. When I was 22 and broke after a layoff, Shelby let me sleep on her couch for 3 months and never ask for $1. That was the kind of friendship we had. Or the kind I thought we had. After her divorce, Shelby stayed single, stayed hungry, and poured everything into the business alongside me. We split ownership 50-50, 2 equal members of the LLC. I handled operations, estimating, client relationships, and crew management. Shelby ran field production. She was good with her hands, knew coatings chemistry better than men twice her age, and could push a crew through a 12-hour containment job in August heat without losing control of the site. She knew how to speak to welders, inspectors, crane operators, county engineers, and tired men who thought taking orders from women was optional until she made it very clear it was not. We were different, but we worked. At least, we did at first. Then, Kieran Vale came into my life. I met Kieran 5 years into the business at a Chamber of Commerce mixer in Savannah that I did not want to attend. I remember standing near a tray of overcooked shrimp, checking my phone every 3 minutes, trying to calculate how soon I could leave without insulting the client who had invited me. Then Kieran laughed at something across the room. Not loudly. Not performatively. Just enough to make people turn their heads. He was working admin for a trucking outfit on the west side. Sharp dresser, calm voice, good posture. The kind of man who looked like he read every contract before he signed it, and remembered every birthday without needing a reminder. We talked for 20 minutes, then an hour. Then he walked me to my truck under a warm Savannah night and said, "You look like someone who hates wasting time." I told him, "That depends who's wasting it." He smiled like he had already decided he wanted to be careful with me. For 6 months he was. Kieran was organized, good with numbers, and patient in a way that made me believe he was steady. He never seemed threatened by the business, never acted strange when I took late calls or left dinner early because a crew had a problem on site. He told me he admired what I built. He said most people talked about independence like a slogan, but I had turned it into payroll, equipment, contracts, and keys. I should have known compliments can be architecture. Sometimes people build rooms inside them and wait for you to walk in. A few months after Kieran and I became serious, he started helping around the office unofficially. A spreadsheet here, a vendor follow-up there, some invoice cleanup when our part-time bookkeeper made a mess of project coding. Bringing him into Tidewater full-time was not my idea. It was Shelby's. We were in the office one afternoon, sweating because the old HVAC unit over the admin desk had died again, and Shelby was flipping through a stack of misfiled purchase orders like each one personally offended her. She said, "You know Kieran could do this better than the people we're paying." I looked up from a bid package. "Do what?" "All of it. Payroll, vendor management, invoices, bank reconciliation. We're bleeding money on a bookkeeper who can't code expenses and a temp who alphabetizes by first name. I remember laughing because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. He'd save us 40 grand a year, Shelby said, and probably keep you from having a stroke before 40. Kieran resisted at first, or at least he performed resistance well enough that I believed it. I don't want anyone thinking I'm here because I'm with you, he told me. You'd be here because you're good, I said. He looked at me across my kitchen table, those careful eyes softening. Then I'll be good. And he was. That was the problem. Within a year, Kieran had our books tighter than they had ever been. Vendor relationships organized, billing cycles shortened from net 45 to net 30 on most accounts. Payroll ran clean. Purchase orders stopped disappearing. Client billing became predictable. He set up QuickBooks properly, managed the company credit cards, handled checking and savings accounts, processed payroll for our 15-man crew, approved reimbursements, flagged duplicate charges, and negotiated with vendors in a tone so calm it made angry people feel embarrassed for raising their voices. He had the keys to the kingdom. Every financial door in Tidewater, Kieran could open without asking me or Shelby for permission. I trusted that, because trust is easy when someone is making your life easier. I'll say this about Kieran because it matters for later. He was not passive. He was not some sweet, harmless boyfriend who accidentally got pulled into something bigger than himself. Kieran was sharp in a way that could cut you while making you think you had been gently touched. He always knew exactly what to say to make you feel like his idea was actually yours. He knew when to push and when to pull back. He knew how to make silence feel like patience instead of pressure. When vendors tried to raise prices, he negotiated them down with quiet firmness. When crew guys submitted sloppy timesheets, he sent them back with corrections and a look that made sure they did not do it twice. When clients delayed payment, he could get a check released without ever sounding desperate. I admired that. God help me, I admired all of it. Shelby and Kieran got along well from the start. At the time, it just seemed convenient. She would come by the office to grab work orders, and they would talk about schedules, crew issues, material delays, equipment repairs, normal small business overlap, normal banter from two people working inside the same pressure cooker. Then Shelby started staying longer. Then she started dropping by the house on Saturdays. Then football Sundays in the fall became routine. My boyfriend. My best friend. My business partner. All sitting around my table eating shrimp and grits, drinking beer, laughing about the week. I used to stand at the sink after dinner and hear their voices from the porch. Kieran's smooth and low. Shelby's rougher, louder, always a little teasing. Sometimes they laughed at something I had not heard, and I would smile because I thought it meant the people I loved had become family to each other. I thought that was a good life. I was wrong. For about 3 years after Kieran took over the office, everything ran smooth. Revenue climbed from $1.8 million to just over $3 million. We landed a recurring maintenance contract with the Georgia Ports Authority for 2 container crane systems at Garden City Terminal. Picked up bridge work for the county. Got on the approved vendor list for 3 regional chemical plants. Bought a second spray rig, a new blast pot, and a containment trailer. Hired 4 more guys. I was proud. Not the cute kind of proud people talk about at networking breakfasts. The bone-deep kind. The kind that lives in your palms because you remember every blister it took to earn the thing. Every midnight bid. Every bounced check in the early years. Every client who assumed Shelby and I were office staff until we opened our mouths and proved we knew more about their steel than they did. Kieran and I bought a house in Isle of Hope. Nothing fancy. A 3-bedroom ranch on a half-acre lot with a dock on the marsh. In the mornings, the fog sat low over the water, and sometimes I would stand there with coffee before work, watching birds lift out of the grass like the world was still gentle. Shelby lived 10 minutes away in a duplex she had been renting since her divorce. Everything felt solid. The business. The relationship. The friendship. Then the numbers stopped adding up. It started with a blast media invoice. We use steel grit and garnet for most abrasive blasting. Bulk orders. 40 to 60 tons at a time, depending on project load. I had tracked material costs loosely for years because Kieran handled purchasing and I trusted his numbers. In March, a vendor rep named Dale from our garnet supplier called me directly. That alone was unusual. Dale usually dealt with Kieran. He sounded cheerful, almost too cheerful, like a man calling with good news. "Genevieve, I just wanted to thank you for the increased volume," he said. "If this pace continues, we can talk tiered discounts." I was standing in the shop bay watching two guys load hose reels into the service truck. "Increased volume?" I said. "Yeah," Dale replied. "You folks have been ordering heavy for months. Figured maybe you landed something big." My eyes moved to the whiteboard where our active jobs were listed. We had not landed something big. If anything, Q1 had been lighter than usual because 2 bridge jobs had been pushed to April for permit issues. I thanked Dale, kept my voice even, and told him I would circle back. Then I went into my office and shut the door. I pulled purchase orders. Kieran had been ordering garnet at roughly double our actual consumption rate for the past 7 months. The invoices were real. The vendor was real. The deliveries were logged. But the quantities did not match what our crews were using on actual jobs. At first, I tried to explain it away. Maybe we had waste I had not seen. Maybe a project had been coded wrong. Maybe one of the crews had stockpiled material. The brain protects the heart by offering stupid explanations before it allows obvious ones. I checked delivery addresses. Half the shipments went to our shop. The other half went to a storage yard in Pooler I had never heard of. I drove out there the following Sunday. Industrial area off Pooler Parkway. Chain link fence. Gravel lot. A couple of shipping containers. A faded sign near the gate with a phone number nobody answered. Behind one container, under a blue tarp weighted down with cinder blocks, I found 6 pallets of bagged garnet stacked in neat rows. Our vendors' lot numbers were printed on the packaging. I stood there for a long moment while trucks hummed somewhere beyond the fence and the spring air pressed warm against my neck. Whoever was running this had been diverting our material and selling it to smaller contractors at a markup. I took photos of everything. The lot. The pallets. The lot numbers. The address on the gate. Then I drove home. Kieran was in the kitchen when I walked in, barefoot, sleeves rolled, making coffee like it was any other Sunday. He looked over his shoulder and smiled. "Everything okay?" I looked at the man I loved. The man who knew every password, every account, every payment cycle, every weakness in the system I had built. And I smiled back. "Yeah," I said. "Just checking something for work." I did not mention Pooler. Not to Kieran. Not to Shelby. Years of running a business teaches you that the worst thing you can do when you suspect a problem is announce that you suspect a problem. You watch. You wait. You let people keep believing they are safe. Because safe people get sloppy. Over the next 3 weeks, I went through every vendor file Kieran managed. I did it at night after he went to sleep, sitting alone in the office with only the desk lamp on, copying invoices and statements onto a thumb drive from the shared company computer. The first night, my hands shook. By the 5th night, they did not. What I found was methodical. A company called Low Country Equipment Solutions had been billing us for containment scaffolding rentals on projects where we owned our own containment gear. 7 invoices over 7 months. Just over $48,000. The company had a website, a phone number, and a P.O. box in Pooler. I called the number from a burner app on my phone. Nobody answered. I checked the Georgia Secretary of State business filings online. Low Country Equipment Solutions had been registered 8 months earlier. The registered agent was a name I did not recognize. Keely Brampton. I searched the name. Nothing useful. Dead end. Then I searched the P.O. box. The same box number appeared on the paperwork connected to the garnet overflow shipments. That was when my stomach dropped. Not because I had found a thief. Because I realized the thief was someone I trusted completely. And I did not yet know if it was my boyfriend, my best friend, or both. 2 days after I found the P.O. box connection, Kieran came to me at the house with a manila folder. It was a Tuesday evening. The kind of humid coastal evening where the windows fogged from the outside and the marsh behind the house smelled alive, muddy, and green. I had just come home from checking a containment setup at a county bridge job, still in work pants, still with dust in the seams of my boots. Kieran was waiting at the kitchen island. The folder sat beside his elbow. He had made dinner, which should have felt sweet. Grilled fish. Rice. A salad I knew he had only made because I once told him heavy food made me tired after job site days. He smiled when I walked in. Long day? Long enough. He poured me iced tea and slid the glass across the counter. His movements were easy, familiar, practiced. That was the cruelest part later, realizing how normal betrayal can look when it has learned your kitchen. He tapped the folder with 2 fingers. Insurance carrier needs updated documentation, he said. Nothing dramatic, just compliance cleanup. I looked at the folder. What kind of documentation? Revised operating agreement, banking authorization language, some housekeeping stuff Wynn probably should have had us update years ago. At that point, Wynn Gatch was not my attorney yet. He was just a name I knew from Savannah legal circles, someone who had handled disputes for contractors I respected. Kieran said it casually, like he was talking about renewing truck tags. I opened the folder. The first few pages looked harmless. Definitions. Member structure. Administrative language. Then I reached the banking section. The revised agreement gave Kieran sole signatory authority on the company's primary checking and savings accounts. It removed the existing requirement for a member co-signature on withdrawals over a certain threshold. My eyes slowed. I turned the page. The buyout clause had also been adjusted. The old agreement required mutual consent for a forced sale. This new version allowed either member to trigger a buyout upon a finding of material breach. Material breach. That phrase sat there like a knife wrapped in clean paper. In practice, it meant if someone could build a paper trail showing I had violated some duty, real or fabricated, they could force me to sell my member interest. And if Kieran controlled the books and Shelby controlled the field documentation, controlling the valuation would not be hard. I read every page. Kieran watched me from across the island, leaning against the counter with that patient expression he used when he wanted me to feel like I was overthinking something simple. The insurance guy needs it by Friday, he said. I closed the folder. I'll have my own guy look it over first. His face did not change much, but something behind his eyes tightened. Just for half a second. Then he smiled. Of course, no rush. No rush. He took the folder back and never mentioned it again. That was how I knew. Not suspected. Knew. Because innocent people may be annoyed when you question paperwork. Guilty people retrieve the weapon before you can examine the fingerprints. I hired a forensic accountant 3 days later. Her name was Rhea Calder. C-P-A-Z-F-E. 20 years of fraud cases involving small and mid-sized contractors. Her office was in Jacksonville, tucked into a plain brick building between a dentist and a title company. Nothing flashy, no glass conference room, no dramatic wall of awards. Just a woman in a navy blouse with tired eyes and a voice that made every sentence sound like it had been checked twice. I gave her the thumb drive. Purchase orders. Vendor statements. Screenshots. Photos from the Pooler yard. Delivery records. The Low Country Equipment Solutions invoices. I explained Tidewater's structure, Kieran's access, Shelby's field authority, and the revised operating agreement. Rhea listened without interrupting. Then she asked, "Who benefits if you are removed?" I almost answered too quickly. Shelby. Kieran. Both. But the words stuck in my throat, because once spoken, they would become real in a way I could not unmake. So I said, "That's what I need you to tell me." Rhea nodded. "I can follow money," she said. "Money tells on people faster than people tell on themselves." She told me it would take 2 weeks. During that time, I tested Kieran once. Just once. We were having breakfast at the kitchen table. He was scrolling through payroll notes on his tablet. I was pretending to read an equipment quote. I said lightly, One of the guys mentioned we've got material sitting in a storage yard off Pooler Parkway. Do you know what that is? Kieran did not flinch. Not even a blink too long. He put his coffee down and looked at me with mild annoyance, like I had asked where we kept the spare printer toner. That's overflow from the Savannah River Bridge job, he said. We didn't have room at the shop. I told you about this in January. He had not told me anything in January. I would have remembered authorizing off-site storage. But he said it with such flat certainty that, for about 3 seconds, I wondered if I had forgotten. That was one of Kieran's talents. He could turn your own memory into a room with bad lighting. Then he added, I can pull the PO if you want, but honestly, I've got payroll and the GPA invoice to finish today. Can it wait? Translation? Stop asking questions. Let me handle it. I smiled. Yeah, it can wait. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. His thumb brushed my knuckles. A month earlier, that touch would have calmed me. That morning, it felt like being handled. By the following week, the Pooler delivery records in our system had been reclassified under a legitimate project code. Kieran cleaned the trail. Not well enough for Rhea, but well enough that a trusting woman would never have looked twice. Rhea called me 13 days after I hired her. I need you in my office, she said. How bad? There was a pause. Worse than your voice suggests you're prepared for. I drove to Jacksonville before sunrise. Fog sat low over I-95. Trucks moved around me like shadows. I remember gripping the steering wheel so hard my fingers cramped, then forcing myself to loosen them one at a time. Rhea had a bound report waiting on the table. Exhibits tabbed. Charts printed. Bank records highlighted. The fake vendor billings through Low Country Equipment Solutions totaled just over $48,000 across 7 months. But that was only one channel. There were padded invoices from legitimate vendors, where quantities had been inflated and the difference skimmed. Fuel reimbursements from stations nowhere near our job sites. Payroll entries for 2 employees who had not worked on the dates listed. Garnet overages that, when traced through delivery records and secondary market sales, added another $28,000. And 3 client payments that had been rerouted to an account at a credit union in Hinesville. That account did not belong to Tidewater. It belonged to Shelby Pratt. I stared at the line until the letters blurred. Shelby Pratt. My Shelby. The girl who had once sat beside me on a dock at 16 and said neither of us would ever let anyone make us small. The woman who had helped me build Tidewater from a rented shop and secondhand equipment. The friend who ate at my table every Saturday. Rhea turned a page. Total estimated misappropriation over 11 months is $211,000. I looked up. She kept her voice even. This required both financial access and operational knowledge. One person handled the books. One person understood the field side well enough to make false charges look legitimate. Kieran and Shelby. Together. Rhea continued. Low Country Equipment Solutions was registered 8 months ago. Registered agent is Keely Brampton. I don't know her. You might know someone connected to her. Rhea slid another page across the table. Keely Brampton. 23. Nursing student. Statesboro. Kieran's cousin on his mother's side. My mouth went dry. Does she know? Hard to say, Rhea said. But based on what I'm seeing, her identity may have been used without meaningful consent. Identity fraud. Fake vendors. Diverted materials. Rerouted client payments. A revised operating agreement designed to push me out. A boyfriend who kissed me goodnight after cleaning the company records. A best friend who smiled across my dinner table while money from my company went into her account. I expected rage. I expected crying. Something dramatic. Instead, something cold settled in my chest. Not numbness. Not peace. Clarity. The kind that arrives when your heart finally stops arguing with the evidence. Rhea asked, "Do you want me to stop here?" I looked at the report. No. She studied my face. You sure? I need the full picture before I move. And I did. Because fraud makes people sloppy. They get comfortable. They start believing silence means ignorance. That is how the rest of it came out. I had a security camera installed in the office the following week. Standard coverage in a common area. Posted notice. Video only. No audio. Completely legal. Kieran barely glanced at the sign when he came in that morning. Shelby joked about it. Trying to catch the guys stealing coffee now? I looked at her and smiled. Something like that. 3 days in, I reviewed footage from a Thursday evening. Kieran had stayed late. He was not working. He stood near the filing cabinet, one hand in his pocket, phone against his ear, pacing slowly. Relaxed. Laughing. I could not hear the voice on the other end. I did not need to. That laugh was not for a vendor. That laugh was not for a client. That was the laugh he used when he wanted someone to feel chosen. The next morning, I was on the shared iPad resetting a vendor login for the company accounts when a message preview appeared. From Shelby. One line. She still has no idea about any of it. I almost feel bad. Almost. The room seemed to tilt. I did not open the message. I did not screenshot it from the iPad because that would leave a trace. I took a photo of the screen with my phone. Then I set the iPad down and walked outside behind the shop, where the air smelled like rust, primer, and wet gravel. One of the crew guys waved at me from beside the spray rig. I waved back. Normal. Everything had to look normal. 4 days later, the camera caught Shelby coming into the office at 9 p.m. Kieran was already there. I watched the feed on my phone from a motel room in Jessup, where I had told Kieran I was staying for an early morning tank inspection. For the first 20 minutes, they did not touch. That almost made it worse. They went through files, moved papers around, printed something, business stuff, fraud stuff. They looked comfortable in my office after dark, comfortable inside the company I had built. Then Shelby walked around the desk. Kieran looked up at her, and whatever small, stupid part of me had still been begging the universe for another explanation died quietly. I watched only long enough to confirm what I needed. Then I forced myself to keep watching for one more reason. The printer. Pages sat in the output tray. The camera angle was not perfect, but when I zoomed in, I could make out enough. It was the revised operating agreement. The same one Kieran had brought me in the manila folder. Except this version had notes in the margin. They were refining it, improving the language, making it cleaner. Something they thought would hold up better if I pushed back again. They were not just sleeping together. They were not just stealing money. They were building a case to take my company. I closed the app, set the phone on the motel nightstand. Then I lay on my back and stared at the ceiling for 2 hours without moving. My brain went back through everything. Every Saturday dinner. Every time Shelby offered to clear plates with Kieran while I took a call. Every football Sunday, when they sat on opposite ends of the couch, but somehow always looked like they were continuing a conversation no one else could hear. Every time Kieran told me Shelby was lonely and I should be kinder. Every time Shelby told me Kieran was good for me and I should let myself trust him. They had both been feeding me pieces of the same lie from opposite sides. By dawn, I had stopped shaking. I showered, drove to the fake tank inspection, did the job, spoke to the client, checked the containment, signed the paperwork, because betrayal did not cancel payroll. By the end of that week, I had downloaded every piece of camera footage and backed it up to 3 separate locations. Ria's report went into a safe deposit box, a cloud folder, and a sealed envelope in my truck. Then I called Wynne Gatch, the Savannah litigation attorney I had once heard other contractors mention, in the same tone people use for dangerous machinery. Respectful. Careful. A little afraid. His office overlooked a square shaded by live oaks. Spanish moss moved outside the window, like old ghosts. Wynne reviewed the report without expression. He watched the video without comment. He read the revised operating agreement twice. Then he leaned back in his chair and removed his glasses. "They're not improvising," he said. "I know. They are positioning you for removal." "I know. They likely intended to create or allege a material breach, trigger a forced buyout, control valuation through manipulated books, and transition client relationships before you understood what had happened. Hearing it in legal language did not make it hurt less. It made it sharper. When asked, "Do you want to confront them?" "No." "Good." I looked at him. He said, "Confrontation is for people who need emotional satisfaction. You need control." That sentence became the spine of everything I did next. Control. Not screaming. Not pleading. Not asking why. Control. During that same week, I caught something else. One of my foremen, Tully, mentioned it by accident. Tully had been with us 4 years. Solid guy. Showed up early, kept his crew tight, did not gossip unless something was seriously wrong. We were walking aside at Garden City Terminal when he said, "So Shelby's taking point with the Port Authority next quarter?" I stopped. "Who told you that?" He looked confused. "Kieran called the PM, didn't he? Said you were slammed with bids and Shelby would coordinate the crane windows with him." The sun was bright that day. Too bright. The kind of brightness that makes everything look overexposed and unreal. I called the Port Authority project manager myself. Casual. Friendly. He confirmed it. Said Kieran had been professional. Said Genevieve was overextended. Said Shelby would be the primary point of contact for the next quarter. He did not think anything of it. Internal reshuffling. Smooth transition. Minimal disruption. It was not reshuffling. It was erasure. They were moving me out of my own client relationships so that when the time came to cut me loose, the clients would already be used to dealing with Shelby and Kieran. Like I was the problem. Like I was the old structure. Like the company I built would run better once I was gone. I thanked the PM, told him I would be handling things personally going forward, and made a note for Wynn's file. That night, I came home late. Kieran was sitting on the porch steps. For one stupid second, the sight of him there hurt so badly, I almost stopped breathing. Because I had loved him. That was the part people forget when they tell betrayal stories, like revenge fantasies. Before someone becomes evidence, they are a person you reached for in the dark. He stood when he saw me. "Rough day?" I nodded. He came down the steps and kissed my forehead. His lips were warm. His hand rested at the back of my neck. I wanted to ask him how he slept beside me. I wanted to ask if he ever looked at my hands and remembered they had signed the checks that built his life. I wanted to ask if Shelby laughed at me after leaving my house. Instead, I said, "Just tired." He held me, and I let him. Because Wynn was right. Confrontation was for people who needed emotional satisfaction. I needed control. 3 days after I confirmed they were trying to move the Port Authority relationship away from me, Kieran told me Shelby was pregnant. Not directly at first. Men like Kieran rarely walk straight into the truth when they can decorate the doorway first. It was a Wednesday night. He cooked dinner again. Grilled shrimp, rice, green beans with too much butter, the kind of meal he made when he wanted the house to smell safe before he said something dangerous. I watched him move around the kitchen, sleeves rolled, jaw tight, a glass of water untouched beside the stove. "You're quiet," I said. He turned too quickly. "Just thinking." "About what?" He wiped his hands on a towel. Then he folded the towel once. Twice. Too carefully. "Shelby's been going through something." My fork stopped halfway to the plate. I looked at him. "Something like what?" He sat across from me, but did not touch his food. "She's pregnant." The room went still. Not silent. Still. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed somewhere beyond the front windows. Outside, the marsh insects kept screaming into the dark, like nothing important had happened. I set my fork down. "Shelby is pregnant." Kieran nodded. "She told you?" "Yes." "When?" "This morning." Lie. I could feel it before I could prove it. His voice had that polished softness he used with vendors when he already knew the answer and wanted them to walk themselves toward it. I asked, "Who's the father?" Kieran looked down. That was the first honest thing he had done in months. He did not say anything for 3 full seconds. Then he whispered, "It's complicated." There are sentences that end relationships without needing details. That was one of them. But I did not move. I did not throw the glass. I did not ask how long. I did not ask where. I did not ask if it happened in my bed, my office, my house, my life. I only said, "How far along?" 8 weeks. 8 weeks. I did the math before he looked up. 8 weeks put conception right around the time I was in Waycross for a 5-day pipeline job. Monday through Friday. Kieran had told me he was sick that week. Barely texted. Said he stayed home from the office because he did not want to spread anything to the crew. He was not sick. He was with Shelby. Kieran reached across the table. I let his hand stop before it touched mine. "Genevieve," he said softly, "I know what this sounds like." "No," I said, "you don't." His face tightened. Then he shifted. Change tactics. "She's terrified." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was so perfectly him. Shelby steals from my company, helps build a legal trap to force me out, sleeps with my boyfriend, gets pregnant, and somehow the first person I am supposed to worry about is her. "She doesn't have anyone," he said. "She has you." He flinched. "Good." "She made mistakes," he continued. "We both did. But the baby didn't." There it was. The baby. The innocent shield. The word people use when they want you to stop looking at the adults who created the wreckage. I leaned back in my chair. "Are you asking me for something?" His eyes lifted. "I'm asking you not to make any decisions tonight." That was almost impressive. He was not asking forgiveness. He was asking delay. Delay meant time. Time meant cleanup. Time meant legal positioning. Time meant calling Shelby. Time meant warning her. So I gave him what he wanted. Or what he thought he wanted. I nodded slowly. "I need time." Relief moved across his face so quickly he could not hide it. "Of course." I stood and picked up my plate. My appetite was gone, but my hands were steady. Kieran watched me carry the food to the sink. "You're being calmer than I expected." I rinsed the plate. The water ran hot over my fingers. I've had practice. He did not know what I meant. That was fine. The next morning, I went to a walk-in clinic and got a full STI panel. Clean. That was the only luck I had been handed in months. After that, I met Wynn twice in 1 week. We laid out every step. Filed nothing yet. Signed nothing yet. Moved nothing yet. Prepared everything. Wynn called it sequencing. I called it rigging containment before blasting. You do not fire the nozzle until every seal is tight and every vent is in place. Otherwise, dust goes everywhere. You lose visibility. You lose control. And I was not going to lose control. There was one more person I told before I moved. My mother. Her name was Margaret Mercer. She lived in Guyton, in the same cinder block ranch house where I grew up after my father left when I was 6. She had raised me alone, working a feed store register for more than 20 years, hands cracked from paper bags and fertilizer sacks, feet swollen every night, voice always tired, but never complaining. For most of my life, I believed my mother was proof that abandonment could be survived with enough discipline. That made what happened next worse. I drove out to her place on a Saturday. She was on the porch when I pulled up, sweet tea on the side table, gray hair pinned back, a small smile already forming because she was happy to see me. That almost broke me. I sat beside her. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. The ceiling fan clicked overhead. Somewhere down the road, a dog barked. Heat shimmered above the driveway. Then I told her everything. The fake vendor. The garnet. The rerouted payments. The Hinesville account in Shelby's name. The revised operating agreement. Kieran. Shelby. The baby. I showed her Ria's report. I showed her the dates proving when Shelby conceived. I showed her enough to understand. I did not show her the office video. She did not need to see that. When I finished, my mother sat very still. Her hands were folded in her lap. She looked smaller than I remembered. Finally, she asked, "How far along is Shelby?" I stared at her. 10 weeks. She nodded slowly. Then she looked out across the yard. "I've waited a long time for you to have a child." Something cold opened under my ribs. "Mom!" "I'm just saying." "No, don't." But she did. She turned to me with wet eyes and the calm conviction of someone about to ask for cruelty and call it love. "Forget the DNA," she said. I stood up halfway without meaning to. She reached for my wrist. "Listen to me." "No." "Genevieve, listen." I sat back down only because I wanted to hear how far she would go. She swallowed. "That baby didn't ask for any of this." I said nothing. "You're stable. You have the house, the business, you have resources. Shelby and Kieran are selfish, yes, but that child is innocent. That child is not mine. Family isn't always blood." I laughed once. Sharp. Empty. She flinched, but kept going. "You could raise him." There it was. Not hinted. Not softened. Said plainly. My mother wanted me to raise the baby my boyfriend had made with my business partner while they were stealing from me. I looked at her for a long time. "Are you serious?" Her voice cracked. "I am saying you are the only adult in this situation who could give that baby a decent life. I am also the adult they betrayed." "I know." "No, you don't." "I do," she insisted. "But sometimes doing the right thing is bigger than what was done to you." The porch seemed to tilt beneath me. I thought of all the times my mother told me never to let a man make me small. Never to beg for love. Never to stay where I was disrespected. And now she was asking me to turn betrayal into a nursery. She leaned forward. "I would help every day if you needed me. I could finally be a grandmother." Finally. That word did it. Not the baby. Not family. Finally. This was not about an innocent child. It was about the role she felt life had denied her. I stood. "Don't ask me again." "Genevieve, I mean it." "You're angry." "Yes." "You're hurt." "Yes." "And you're about to punish a baby because 2 adults sinned." I looked down at her. "No, I'm refusing to punish myself because they did." She started crying then. Not loudly. Quiet tears. The kind that would have moved me on any other day. But grief can become manipulation when someone aims it at your weakest place. She said, "You're stronger than them." "I know." "Then act like it." I turned and walked to my truck. She called after me from the porch. Her voice broke. The chair scraped as she stood. I did not look back. The drive from Guyton to Isle of Hope took 45 minutes. I did not turn on the radio. I did not cry. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sun was going down behind the trees, and the house looked exactly the same as it had that morning. That offended me. How dare the walls stay still when everything inside them had changed? I went in through the side door. Kieran was not home. Good. I opened the hall closet and took down every framed photo of my mother that hung in the house. 4 of them. One from my college graduation. One from the day Tidewater signed its first 6-figure contract. One of us on the dock after I bought the house. One old photo from when I was maybe 7, sitting on her lap in front of a Christmas tree we could barely afford. I put them in a cardboard box. Taped it shut. Set it in the garage beside recycling. Over the next 2 days, she called 9 times. Texted paragraphs. First apology. Then explanation. Then accusation. Then apology again. She said she had not meant it the way it sounded. Then she said she had meant it, but I was twisting it. Then she said I was being selfish. Then she cried through a voicemail and said she was scared of being alone. I read every message. Listened to none of the voicemails. Responded to nothing. On the third day, I called the utility company and canceled the autopay I had been running for her electric bill for 7 years. Then I called her cell carrier and removed her from my family plan. Then I stopped the monthly transfer I had been sending since she retired. She noticed within a week. She called me 14 times in one day. I did not pick up. She drove to my house. I was not there. She went to the office. Kieran told her I was on a job site. That sentence haunted me later. My mother, standing in my company, asking my cheating boyfriend where I was while he was helping steal everything I had built. That was the last time I allowed either of them access to me. No reply. No argument. No final conversation. People think endings need speeches. They don't. Sometimes the cleanest ending is a locked door and no explanation. By then, Wynne had everything ready. Ria's report was complete. The footage was backed up. Client notes were documented. Bank records were organized. The forged vendor trail was mapped. The revised operating agreement was photographed and preserved. Dale from the garnet supplier had agreed to sign an affidavit confirming delivery discrepancies. The trap Kieran and Shelby built for me was still sitting open. They had no idea I had already stepped around it. Wynne called me on a Friday afternoon. His voice was calm. "We can move Monday." I looked out the office window at the yard. Shelby was standing near the containment trailer, laughing with one of the crew leads, one hand resting lightly against her stomach. Kieran stood in the doorway beside me, pretending to review invoices. Both of them close enough to touch. Both of them already gone from my life. I said, "Monday." That weekend, Shelby came over for dinner like usual. Kieran cooked. I opened wine I did not drink. Shelby sat at my table and talked about field production delays like she had not been taking money from my company and carrying my boyfriend's child. At one point, she complimented the shrimp. Kieran smiled at her. It was quick. A glance. A private thing. A thread pulled tight between them. I watched it happen from across the table and felt nothing. That was when I knew I was ready. Not because I stopped hurting. Because hurting no longer made me hesitate. After dinner, Shelby helped Kieran clear plates while I stood on the porch looking toward the marsh. The tide was low. Mud exposed. Everything hidden under water during the day had surfaced in the dark. I remember thinking that nature had a sense of humor. By Monday morning, I was done being the woman they underestimated. I was done being the girlfriend who trusted. The friend who opened her home. The daughter who paid bills quietly. The business owner who let other people hold keys because love made her generous. Generosity had built my life. Documentation was about to save it. I executed everything in 1 week. Monday through Friday. Planned it the same way we planned major shutdown projects at Tidewater. Every step sequenced. Every contingency mapped. No wasted motion. No emotional improvisation. Just pressure applied in the right places until the structure failed exactly where you intended it to. Monday morning, Wynne Gatch filed an ex parte emergency motion for a temporary restraining order, freezing all Tidewater business accounts pending a forensic audit. The motion argued immediate risk of asset dissipation because 2 individuals with direct financial access had already demonstrated a pattern of siphoning funds and concealing evidence. It included Ria's forensic report, bank records, the fake vendor documentation, screenshots of rerouted payments, purchase order discrepancies, and an affidavit from Dale at the garnet supplier confirming delivery inconsistencies. The filing also sought injunctive relief, granting me temporary sole operational control of Tidewater Protective Coatings LLC and barring Kieran Vale and Shelby Pratt from company premises pending a full hearing. The judge signed the emergency TRO before lunch. 10-day hearing said afterward. But I did not need 10 days. I only needed momentum. Monday afternoon, I walked into the office carrying a sealed envelope. Kieran was sitting at the admin desk processing invoices, exactly where he had spent years building the knife he intended to use on me. The office smelled like printer toner and stale coffee. One of the crew radios crackled faintly from the shop bay. Kieran looked up when I entered, smiled automatically. Then he saw my face. Something inside him shifted. Not guilt. Recognition. Like a man hearing a sound in the woods and finally understanding it belongs to a predator. "What's wrong?" he asked quietly. I set the envelope on the desk. "What's this?" "Open it." His fingers hesitated only once before tearing the seal. Inside was a formal termination notice from Tidewater Protective Coatings LLC, effective immediately. Attached behind it was a demand letter seeking restitution for all misappropriated funds. And behind that, Ria's summary figures. Low Country Equipment Solutions. Rerouted payments. Fraud totals. Every line item laid bare. Kieran's face lost color slowly. Not dramatically. It drained out of him in stages. First, confusion. Then calculation. Then realization. Then fear. His eyes stopped on the Low Country line. That was the moment he understood how much I knew. 20 feet away, 2 crew guys were loading hose reels into a truck. They had stopped working, watching through the open bay door. Nobody said a word. Kieran looked up at me. "Genevieve." I turned around and walked out. That was all. No screaming. No throwing things. No desperate questions. I had learned something important over the previous month. Kieran's voice was a tool. He used it to soothe, distract, delay, negotiate, seduce, confuse. I was done letting him use it on me. My phone rang before I even reached my truck. Shelby. I let it ring. Then again. Then Kieran. Then Shelby again. By evening, I had 17 missed calls. I answered none of them. Tuesday morning, a locksmith arrived at the shop at 6 a.m. New deadbolts on every door. New alarm codes. Court order in hand. Every bit of it legal. The sun was barely up when Wynn filed the civil suit against Shelby Pratt. Breach of fiduciary duty.
Fraud.
Conversion. Unjust enrichment. Civil RICO. The suit sought dissolution of the LLC, full accounting of diverted funds, forfeiture of Shelby's ownership interest, damages, attorney's fees, and injunctive relief preventing her from representing Tidewater in any capacity. Shelby was served at her duplex at 7:14 a.m. Wynn texted me confirmation at 7:21. Shelby called me 11 times that day. I did not answer. At 1:53 p.m., she showed up at the shop. I saw her truck through the office blinds before she even stepped out. She moved fast, angry, pregnant and furious, and still somehow convinced she could talk her way through this. The new lock stopped her at the front door. She yanked the handle once, twice, then harder. The glass shook. Inside, 3 crew members pretended not to watch. Shelby pounded on the door. "Genevieve!" I stood in my office behind the blinds and watched. Years earlier, that same parking lot had been where we shook hands and promised to build something together. Now she stood outside it like a stranger. She saw me through the slats. For a second, neither of us moved. Then she started yelling. I could not hear every word through the glass. But I caught enough. "You can't do this! You're destroying everything! You think you're innocent?" That last one almost made me laugh. I turned away from the window, sat down at my desk, and went back to reviewing a bid package for a water tower recoating project in Effingham County. Eventually, Shelby left. Tuesday night, Kieran finally stopped calling. That worried me more than the calls had. Silence from manipulative people is rarely surrender. It usually means strategy. Wednesday morning, Wynn filed the civil separation and property actions related to Kieran. Since we were not legally married, there was no divorce decree. But there were shared assets, cohabitation issues, financial entanglements, and evidence of conspiracy connected to company fraud. Wynn moved aggressively.
Exclusive possession of the house.
Protective financial orders.
Preservation of electronic evidence.
Every filing clean.
Documented. Precise.
That same morning, I had the locks changed at the house. New deadbolt. New garage code. New alarm credentials. The locksmith asked if I wanted additional reinforcement plates installed. Yes, I said. Everything? Everything. That evening, Kieran came home. Or tried to. I watched from the back of the house as his car rolled into the driveway. For one brief second, seeing his headlights cut across the yard hurt so badly, I had to grip the edge of the counter. Memory is cruel like that. Your body reacts before your mind reminds it the person outside is dangerous. Kieran walked up the front steps carrying an overnight bag. He looked tired. Really tired. Like the last 48 hours had finally reached his bones. He tried the front door. Locked. He stood still. Tried again. Then he knocked. Once. Twice. Harder. Genevieve? I stayed silent. Genevieve, open the door! Nothing. His voice changed. Not angry yet. Careful. We need to talk. Number. We didn't. Talking was what got me here. Trusting words instead of records. He knocked harder. Then he called my phone. I watched it vibrate on the kitchen counter. Ignored it. He sat on the porch steps for almost an hour. I watched from the back hallway window where he could not see me. At one point, he put his face in his hands. At another, he stared out toward the marsh like he was trying to understand how his life had collapsed so quickly. But that was the thing. It had not collapsed quickly. It had collapsed the moment he decided I was stupid enough to betray. He finally left just after 10. The next morning, legal paperwork was waiting at the condo of a friend he had apparently been staying with. Thursday, Ria's report was formally submitted as a criminal referral to the Chatham County District Attorney's Office. Theft by deception. Identity fraud for using Keely Brampton's name. Theft by conversion. Fraudulent vendor activity. Wynn warned me not to expect miracles. Financial crimes don't always get prosecutorial attention unless the losses are massive or politically useful. Will they pursue it? Maybe, he said, but civil court is where you bury people like this. Cold sentence. True sentence. By Friday morning, the rumors had already started moving through contractor circles. Not details. Just smoke. Something happened at Tidewater. Shelby's out. Kieran's gone. Accounts frozen. Lawyers involved. In industrial contracting, gossip travels faster than invoices. That was why Friday mattered most. Clients. If clients panicked, everything else became irrelevant. So I met with every active account personally where possible. Phone calls were not. I wore a navy blazer over work clothes because I wanted them to remember exactly who I was. Not a victim. Not a scandal. The woman who built the company. I explained there had been internal financial irregularities, that Shelby Pratt and Kieran Vale were no longer authorized to represent Tidewater, that all existing contracts would be honored without interruption, that I had taken corrective legal action and implemented financial safeguards. I brought the Port Authority project manager a folder showing the audit trail and the corrective measures already in place. He flipped through it slowly. Then he looked at me and said, I appreciate transparency. Not one client left. Not one. Every contract stayed. That Friday afternoon, Kieran played his last card. His attorney contacted Wynn with what amounted to a threat dressed in professional language. Shelby was pregnant. Kieran was the father. Public exposure of the affair and litigation could become messy and damaging for everyone involved. In exchange for avoiding broader escalation, Kieran wanted favorable settlement terms related to shared property, residence equity, and financial claims. He thought the scandal itself was leverage. He thought embarrassment would make me softer. Wynne called me immediately. I was sitting in my truck outside a supply yard when his name lit the screen. He read me portions of the letter. Then he asked, "How do you want to respond?" I stared through the windshield at stacks of steel drums baking in the Georgia heat. Then I said, 3 points. I'm listening. First, I'm accepting zero legal, financial, or personal responsibility for Shelby's child. Understood. Second, any attempt to attach me publicly or financially to their situation will trigger counterclaims tied to conspiracy, fraud, and reputational damages. Wynne was already typing. And third? I smiled for the first time in weeks. Tell him I documented everything. Silence. Then Wynne chuckled softly. The timeline? The timeline, the footage, the travel records, hotel receipts, vendor logs, everything. In the background, I heard pages turning. Wynne said, "That should end the negotiation quickly." It did. The threat evaporated within 48 hours. Because leverage only works when the other person is afraid. And by then, fear had already burned out of me. Friday night, I went home.
Alone.
For the first time in months, the house felt quiet, in a good way. No hidden conversations. No secret glances. No tension disguised as normalcy. I walked out onto the dock behind the house, with a glass of bourbon I barely touched. The tide rolled slowly across the marsh under moonlight. Somewhere far off, a boat engine hummed. I sat there, thinking about the last few years. How carefully betrayal had built itself around me. Not in one giant lie. In hundreds of small permissions. Trust this person. Hand over that password. Let him handle the books. Let her manage the clients. You're tired. You're busy. You don't need to double-check people who love you. I thought about my mother, too. About the last thing she said before I left her porch. You're stronger than them. She had meant it as manipulation. But she was accidentally right. Because stronger did not mean kinder. It meant I survived. By the end of that week, Kieran had no access to Tidewater. Shelby had no access to Tidewater. Their accounts were frozen. Their fraud was documented. Their affair was exposed. Their legal strategy was dead. And the company they tried to steal was still mine. I sat on the dock until after midnight, watching the tide come in. First peaceful night I had slept in months. But the next phase was coming. Court.
Depositions. Public records. D.N.A.
The collapse had started. Gravity just needed time to finish its work. The next several months played out the way gravity works after a building loses structural support. Not dramatic at first. Just inevitable. Temporary orders came quickly. The judge granted me exclusive operational control of Tidewater within weeks. Company accounts remained frozen pending final accounting, but payroll was released under supervised authorization so the crews could keep working. That mattered to me more than I expected. The guys at Tidewater had mortgages, kids, truck payments. They were not responsible for what Shelby and Kieran did. I refused to let betrayal spread damage onto people who had shown up honestly every morning. The house stayed with me under temporary possession orders. Kieran was barred from entering without notice. Shelby's access to company systems was permanently revoked. The first hearing lasted nearly 4 hours. Shelby arrived wearing a cream-colored maternity dress and a carefully exhausted expression. Kieran sat beside her, looking thinner than I had ever seen him, jaw shadowed, eyes hollow from too many sleepless nights. For one strange second, they almost looked like victims. Then Rhea testified. And the illusion died. She walked the court through every fraudulent invoice, every inflated purchase order, every rerouted payment, every fake vendor relationship. Calm, methodical, precise. She explained how the shell company functioned, how the garnet diversion worked, how payroll entries had been padded, how vendor quantities had been manipulated, how Tidewater funds had flowed into accounts tied directly to Shelby Pratt. The courtroom became very quiet when she reached the total. $211,000.
documented, traceable, intentional.
Shelby's attorney tried arguing accounting confusion. Rhea dismantled him in less than 15 minutes. Then Wynn introduced the revised operating agreement. The one Kieran had tried to slide across my kitchen counter, like harmless paperwork. Wynn explained how the proposed language would have allowed forced restructuring and potential removal of my controlling interests under manipulated conditions. The judge's face changed when he understood the implication. This was not just theft. It was an attempted takeover. Kieran avoided looking at me the entire hearing. Shelby looked several times. Not guilty. Not apologetic. Angry. That fascinated me. Even after everything, some part of her still believed I had wronged her by refusing to collapse quietly. Outside the courthouse afterward, reporters were not waiting. This was not that kind of case. But contractor gossip had spread enough that several people from the industry lingered near the steps, pretending not to watch. I heard someone whisper Shelby's name. Another man muttered, "Jesus Christ." Then they saw me looking and suddenly became very interested in their phones. The temporary rulings favored me heavily.
Exclusive possession of the house. Sole operational authority. Asset restrictions.
Continued forensic oversight. Shelby's attorney attempted to argue she was entitled to substantial compensation because of her ownership position and pregnancy-related financial hardship. Wynn countered with fraud documentation so devastating, the argument collapsed before lunch. The judge was not sympathetic to thieves carrying unborn children. Pregnancy did not erase financial crimes. That realization seemed to shock Shelby more than anything else. About 4 months later, she gave birth to a boy. Complications started immediately. The baby was born with a congenital heart defect, requiring surgery and long-term specialist care. I found out through legal filings first, then through rumors, then through Kieran himself. He called once from the hospital. I answered because I thought it might be Wynn. His voice sounded wrecked. Not performatively wrecked. Actually broken. "Genevieve," he whispered. I almost hung up immediately. Then I heard something in the background. A baby crying. Machines beeping. Kieran inhaled shakily. "He's sick." I closed my eyes. There are moments when your anger and your humanity collide so violently, you feel both tearing at the same time. I did not hate the baby. That child had done nothing except arrive in the middle of selfish adults. But innocence does not create obligation. Kieran spoke again. "I know you don't owe us anything." Us. Interesting word. "We're struggling." I said nothing. "He needs surgery." Still nothing. Then Kieran finally asked the question he had really called to ask. "Can we talk?" No apology. No accountability. No acknowledgement of what they stole. Just another request for access to me. I answered quietly. There is no we anymore. Then I hung up. I sat in my office afterward, staring at the wall for almost 10 minutes. Not crying. Not shaking. Just tired. The DNA filings came shortly after the birth. Because Kieran was the father and Shelby was the mother, there was no confusion legally about parentage between them. But Wynn still pushed aggressively to make sure no financial or civil entanglement could ever be redirected toward me through partnership history or cohabitation claims. Everything became airtight. The final civil rulings came down several months later. I kept the house. I kept Tidewater. I kept 80% of the jointly disputed assets tied to the fraud recovery structure. Kieran walked away with his car, personal belongings, and debt. No settlement windfall. No leverage. No graceful exit. The judge specifically cited documented financial misconduct as a major factor in the distribution rulings. Shelby's situation got worse after that. The civil suit moved toward trial, and her attorney realized quickly they were losing. The original Tidewater operating agreement, the real one, the version Shelby once signed without reading carefully because she trusted me, contained explicit fiduciary language prohibiting undisclosed vendor interest and requiring mutual written approval for significant third-party financial relationships. Ria's report connected every violation cleanly, down to the penny. Shelby settled before trial. Full restitution amount. Additional damages. Structured repayment. She did not have the cash, so she signed over almost everything she owned. Her truck, her boat,
Savings. Retirement account.
then agreed to a long-term payment structure when secured, with aggressive collection protections. The DA's office declined prosecution. Not enough resources. Financial fraud against private businesses rarely receives dramatic attention unless the losses are enormous or politically convenient. Wynne was unsurprised. Civil judgment is enough, he told me. In your industry, reputation is oxygen. He was right. The judgment became public record. And public record in industrial contracting spreads like diesel in water. I restructured Tidewater as a single-member LLC. Then I rebuilt the office from scratch. No more emotional hiring. No more blurred boundaries. No more letting intimacy near payroll systems. I hired a new bookkeeper named Odell Granger, retired Navy logistics chief. Gray mustache.
Permanent frown.
The kind of man who thought creativity was suspicious in accounting. Perfect. I also hired a full-time office administrator named Priya Desai to handle scheduling and client communication. The crews stayed. Most of them understood enough not to ask questions. Blue-collar men have their own ethics about humiliation. If they respect you, they pretend not to notice the wound unless you mention it first. Nobody mentioned it. Everybody showed up on time. And strangely enough, business improved. Without Shelby skimming. Without Kieran padding invoices. Without hidden leakage draining the company from the inside. Our actual margins were far stronger than I realized. I bid aggressively on 3 new contracts. Won all 3. A maintenance agreement with a paper mill in Rincon. A 5-year county bridge coatings program. And a marine support contract tied to offshore equipment inspections. Revenue climbed past $3.5 million. Then closer to 4. Meanwhile, Shelby's life collapsed publicly and slowly. She tried starting her own coatings outfit. Nobody reputable would hire her. Word had spread too far. One plant manager reportedly handed her bid package back unopened and told her to leave the property. Another contractor told one of my foremen, "I'd rather hire a raccoon with a pressure washer."
Cruel.
But not inaccurate. Eventually, Shelby took under-the-table work through smaller crews, desperate enough not to care about reputation. That ended badly. About a year and a half after the TRO, Shelby was working a commercial roofing support job near Brunswick when a section of staging collapsed. She fell 9 feet onto concrete. 2 herniated discs. Lower lumbar damage. Chronic pain after surgery.
Limited mobility.
No insurance. The irony would have been poetic if it were not so ugly. The woman who once climbed industrial containment systems in August heat now struggled to stand longer than 20 minutes. Last I heard, she was living in a trailer park outside Jessup, collecting disability checks that barely covered rent. Kieran's situation was not much better. Medical bills crushed him. The child support structure between him and Shelby became messy because neither of them had stable income. Their son needed ongoing cardiac treatment, specialists, medications, monitoring. A sick child magnifies every weakness in adults, especially adults built on lies. At one point, Kieran tried listing me as an emergency contact on hospital paperwork. The hospital actually called to verify. I remember standing in the Tidewater yard with a clipboard while a nurse politely asked, "Are you related to the patient?" "No." "To the father?" "No." "To the mother?" "No." There was a pause. Then I said, "Please remove my information permanently." The nurse sounded embarrassed. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. By then, even the people who enabled them had disappeared. Keely Brampton cut Shelby off completely after learning her identity had been used in the shell company registration. My mother attempted to contact Shelby once. Apparently, Shelby told her to stay away. That detail reached me through somebody who knew somebody in Guyton. Funny how quickly people stop wanting complicated morality once they are forced to live inside the consequences. 3 years passed. I turned 40. Tidewater was profitable, stable, debt-free. 2 spray rigs. 12 full-time employees. Major contracts secured through 2029. The house in Isle of Hope fully paid off. Sometimes I still woke before dawn and stood on the dock with coffee, watching the marsh breathe under morning fog. But the silence felt different now. Cleaner. No hidden rot underneath it. About 8 months after the final rulings, I met someone. His name was Josiah Reed. Marine surveyor. Worked with cargo insurers and offshore shipping investigations. We met because he inspected corrosion damage on a barge support structure connected to one of my contracts. He was nothing like Kieran. No polished charm. No manipulative softness. Josiah spoke plainly, laughed rarely, and once spent 20 minutes explaining why people who rush trust usually end up bleeding from it. I remember staring at him after he said that. He noticed. What? Nothing, I replied. But it was not nothing. It was the first time in years another person's honesty did not feel like a performance. We took things slowly. Pain teaches caution if you survive it properly. 2 years later, he moved into the Isle of Hope house. No trace of Kieran remained there anymore. Not the furniture. Not the photos. Not the coffee mugs. Nothing. Sometimes people ask if I regret going so hard. If I regret freezing accounts. Filing lawsuits. Cutting off my mother permanently. Destroying Shelby financially. Walking away from Kieran completely while he struggled with a sick child. No. I regret trusting people who mistook love for permission. I regret handing pieces of my life to people who viewed loyalty as leverage. But the consequences? No. Because none of what happened to them came from my revenge. It came from their decisions finally reaching the end of the road. A year ago, Shelby mailed a handwritten letter to the office. Odell placed it on my desk without comment. I looked at the envelope for a long time, then fed it through the shredder unopened. Same way I would shred junk mail. My mother is still alive, as far as I know. She left one voicemail on an old number, saying she was sorry. I believe her. That does not change what she asked me to become. And Kieran? He reached out once through email. Subject line. I never stopped loving you. I deleted it without opening the message. Because love without loyalty is just appetite. Sometimes I still think about Dale, the garnet supplier rep. If he had never called me about increased material volume, how much longer would the theft have continued? How much more would they have taken? Would they have forced me out eventually? Would Tidewater still even belong to me? I do not know. Doesn't matter. He called. I listened. And once I saw the truth, I moved.